The Last of Us Part 2 is the most divisive game I have ever played. Never have I seen a game garner so much hate and anger towards itself, with the release day reviews being at an average of 1.8 stars. Now, like everyone else, I'm a big fan of the first game. It is undoubtedly a masterpiece and utilized the medium of video games expertly to create a one-of-a-kind experience, cementing itself as one of the greatest games ever made. This is why all the negative reviews piqued my curiosity. How could the follow-up to a masterpiece be so hated, so despised that many deem it as unplayable, with many videos and reviews on YouTube claiming that they will refuse to even finish the game? This led me to hastily purchase the game off GameStop for an extra $10 for same-day release day shipping, only for it to come 4 days after launch. Taking this as a bad omen, I went into the game skeptical yet intrigued on what I would find. What I didn't find was a game that was so bad, so grotesquely unfair that I had to set down my controller, burn my PS4, and quit playing video games forever. What I did find was an experience that is by no means, let me repeat that, no means better than the first game, but certainly not as bad as everyone says. This positive reception pushed me to get my opinions out, which is why today I will be dissecting The Last of Us Part 2 and try to explain why it works so well. Spoilers ahead. Before the rest of the video goes on, I just want to say before people pillage my home for this video, I know this game isn't perfect. It has problems, many of which I was pretty annoyed with throughout my playthrough. But I didn't find any of these problems so severe that I had to stop playing. I'll touch on them later though. XOXO, Nicholas Kawa. The year is 2018, and at E3 the audience is placed inside of a tent for some reason. We found out that the reason is because a trailer for The Last of Us 2 is being released. The crowd murmurs, "Psst, I can't believe this game's coming out. Psst, I hope it's good. Psst, Ellie's gay? Psst, why are we inside of this tent?" After this trailer is basically when it all went downhill. As more trailers and news began to drop, people became more upset with the game before it even released. People were especially upset after the leaks of the story came out, and it seemed to contradict everything we as the audience already knew about the game. Naughty Dog said Ellie would be the only playable character when, in reality, Ellie's one of many. Naughty Dog manipulated the trailers to portray Joel as a vital character in the game when, in reality, Joel dies within the first hour. Essentially, Naughty Dog tried to cover everything up until the game's release for players to get the ultimate experience, and as much of the game relies on the player's intuition and lack of foresight. Needless to say, the community was maybe just a teeny bit upset upon playing the game for the first time. The audience was so divided that the reviews for the most part consisted of only 5 stars and 1 stars. I believe many people's anger came from the lies that Naughty Dog told the audience prior to release. People weren't expecting to play as Joel's killer throughout the game. It was advertised as a revenge story with a focus on Ellie and Joel being a central character. Many people find this offensive, completely immoral to manipulate the audience in such a way. To some degree, I can see this argument, but let me bring to light a particularly similar situation. The year is 2000, and at a small little convention called E3, Metal Gear Solid 2's first trailer was released, with the audience strangely not in a tent. The trailer was amazing. Our favorite spy, Solid Snake, was shown to be sneaking around, killing enemies, using new weapons, and being as cool as ever on the generation-defying PS2 graphics. People were beyond excited. Metal Gear Solid is still one of the most beloved games of all time, and with it finally getting a sequel, one where Snake actually has a face I might add, set the gaming community on fire. The advertising showed Snake as the only playable character, but when the game released, the audience was given something different. Raiden, the blonde-haired spy that was to take over the game after a mere few hours as Snake, was information never released to the public in North America. People were, pissed that the game was not featuring the stealthily Solid Snake we all know and love, but rather a blonde-haired, high-voiced loudmouth of a spy that paled in comparison to the action hero. It had a similar reaction to The Last of Us 2, with critics raving about the game and fans refusing to play, enraged by the untold switch-up. However, as time passed and people let go of their anger, everyone eventually learned that Metal Gear Solid 2 is one of the greatest games ever made. Some rave it as the best in the series, and one of the best games of all time. Now, the question is, did The Last of Us 2 do anything different? I'm not comparing anyone to the legendary Hideo Kojima, and MGS2 is certainly better than The Last of Us 2. But why is what Naughty Dog did so wrong? Did it deceive the audience? Yeah. Did it manipulate the fans' anticipation for the game? Yeah. But was it necessary for the experience? Absolutely. It's okay to disagree, but if I knew the plot going in, I know I would have enjoyed it so much less. Some may find it immoral to lie to the audience in such a way, while others view it as a necessary artistic choice. The line is very thin, but I'm of the perception that this commercial manipulation is not inherently bad for the overall gaming experience. The reason I say this is because many refuse to continue playing the game because of the bold choices taken by Naughty Dog. Many have said that they have put the controller down and walked away from it all after seeing Joel die, having to play as Abby again, and Ellie not being how they pictured. However, these aren't problems with the game per se. These are problems with the player's perception of the franchise. Of course, we wanted more Joel and Ellie, but that's not what we got, and that's okay. It's sad seeing an icon die, but not playing the rest of the game because it's not how you expected it is only depriving yourself of an experience. It may take years, but hopefully this game's outcome is similar to that of Metal Gear Solid 2's, and people will come around to it, actually play the game, and formulate an opinion on what happens in the game and not what they want it to happen. With that being said, I think it's time to actually talk about the game. I'll keep this section short because we pretty much already know this. The game is beautiful. Some cutscenes seem more real than real life. The rain that pours on Abby while she is about to be hung glistens more than it would in real life. It is unbelievably good looking, and what really surprised me was how well it ran. My PS4 recently sounded like a garbage truck pushing 50 while trying to run Dishonored 2, and had multiple crashes, but had no problem running this game. It actually makes zero sense. This game looks unbelievable, and my PS4 hasn't ran this smooth since I played Destiny. It made virtually no noise, had no crashes, and the only bug I can remember is that an enemy's lines weren't playing while I found a dead body, which was solved when he promptly killed me and the game reloaded. Overall, it runs amazingly, which allows for the violence depicted on screen to resonate even more. The graphics allow for the game to hit harder because of how real it looks and feels. The game wants to be taken seriously, and for the most part, I was right there with it. Now that we're done gawking at how great this game looks/runs, let's actually talk about the game and how it feels to play. I played the main story on medium difficulty. I've heard that many found this too easy, but since I'm a big dumb baby, I still died quite a few times. Now, I believe that the sequel to a video game has a certain level of expectations when regarding gameplay. There is no need to reinvent the wheel if the initial entry has already succeeded gameplay-wise, but there almost always requires expansion/improvement of the gameplay system. I'm glad to say that when players are not busy throwing their controllers and crying because they have to play as Abby, they will be welcome to exciting, explosive, and engaging gameplay, for the most part. I took notes throughout the game to try and make sure I had some cohesive ideas for this video, and many of them were about aspects of the gameplay. In the beginning of the game, Ellie and Dina explore a pretty open area of downtown Seattle to find gas that will open a gate. This is the first example of many Last of Us 2's open level designs, which are a hit or miss for me. The game allows the player to explore freely during these segments, mostly just wandering into buildings to loot. At first this was great. Exploring these areas and finding worthwhile loot was exciting. Finding the shotgun in the bank was rewarding because I was scared to go in there and I came out with something worthwhile. Pairing this with collectibles like Ellie's trading cards that provided allegories for the story and old letters that created mini narratives made exploring fun. Initially. However, as the game went on, I could only become more bored with the cycle of finding a new area, exhaustively searching every square inch for loot, leaving with not much new, and continuing with the story. More often than not, I searched every building, every drawer, every compartment, every crevice for something that was met with full icons on my item and nothing else. This is where people would ask, why would you loot if all your resources are full? The answer is because there are items that don't reach a max quantity, and these items can actually be pretty useful. Pills, screws, trading cards, etc. don't have a max capacity, which made me want to explore everything, and when there was nothing I was left disappointed. Mashing the triangle button while awkwardly pacing around open spaces and not engaging gameplay no matter the reward. So in half the time it doesn't even give the player any reward, it feels like I just wasted my time. The worst part is that the game pulls this exploration off really well in some cases. There was a particular moment where to loot a building I had to make it past bloaters. There was an exit indicating this was not necessary. Therefore, this left me with a choice: face horrific monsters and potentially waste my resources for something new, or continue the story knowing I could have missed out on something. It was a gamble, something I had to think about, and I backed away. It wasn't worth it for me at the time. In a few other moments that had a similar scenario, I would have to analyze the situation and decide if I was willing to take the risk. More often than not, I eventually decided to push forward and was actually rewarded. This is the type of exploration that should take place. One that makes the player think about looting instead of mindlessly pressing triangle while galloping through worn-down buildings. Exploring also works well when it provided bonuses besides looting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Take On Me song scene seemed optional, and if this was the case, it was a perfect example of exploring. Providing the player with further narrative context and not simple loot makes this exploring incredibly worthwhile. However, these examples of solid exploration are usually put in the back burner with mindless exploration taking its place. In fact, I don't think there's any other portion of the game that provided further narrative context through optional exploration. At its best, exploration gives a fun challenge with worthwhile rewards that range from collectibles to useful resources, and at its worst, it's just a waste of time. Not to mention, the open level designs can be incredibly confusing. Again, I'm a big dumb baby, so I was lost pretty often, especially in settings that were pitch black. I frequently died just because I didn't know where I was in a gunfight, or I had no clue where I was supposed to go because of the open layout. Again, this may just be me, but I'm willing to bet that there were other players that were also confused from the level layout. Between the exploration is where the gameplay really shines, the combat sections. The combat and stealth sections of this game are amazing. Everything is expanded upon or improved from the last game, and if I recall correctly, was exactly what needs to happen to have a solid sequel gameplay-wise. More of the same, except done better. Stealth missions felt incredibly satisfying to play for various reasons. The enemy's AI is spectacular, and trying to ghost your way through a level is a fun and challenging task. The resources you have and items you're able to craft are also way better than the previous game. Crafting incendiary ammo, silencers, and more culminate in a more engaging and fun stealth experience. It's challenging, requires thought, and allows for multiple options on how to stealth your way through a level. I personally never crafted trip mines or smoke bombs, but other players could utilize them frequently. It allows for a more personal and expressive form of stealth, which with great AI makes for an amazing experience. And when the bullets inevitably start flying, the player is met with some really satisfying gunplay. The weapons just feel so heavy, like each bullet carries massive weight and every hit feels life-threatening. It is brutal, savage, and incredibly fun. And if you decide to go the more risky route, or are just bad at the game like I am, playing a style of run, gun, and stealth is really enjoyable. The seamless combination of gunplay and stealth gives for a beautiful combination of gameplay and systems. It's like Reese's, such a beautiful and perfect combination. Not to mention how brutal the gameplay is. Enemies will name drop people you've killed, the animations of chokeholds show enemies' eyes rolling back into their heads, slamming an axe into someone feels like you really sunk everything you had into them. Seeing blood squirt out of a person's neck like a hose is horrible, but you can't turn yourself away. It is completely and utterly unforgiving in its depiction of violence and lends itself perfectly to the main themes of the game: morality, revenge, forgiveness, and perspective. So to close off the gameplay section of this video, let's recap. 1. The exploration is a mixed bag of exciting gambles and sections that do nothing but waste time. 2. The stealth gameplay makes me feel like Solid Snake. 3. The gunplay and more head-on action is the most satisfying I've played in a third-person shooter in a while. And 4. All this culminates in a system that is both enjoyable, seamless, and expresses the games beautifully. Here we are, the meat and the potatoes of this game and why everyone either loves it or hates it. I'm going to say right now, this game's story works. Is it perfect? No. In fact, I have a couple of problems that I'll address later, but this game's story is by no means so bad that it makes me gag and not want to play. The problem is that people are upset over very surface level and more franchise-related problems. They're upset that Joel is dead or that they had to play as Abby, so much so that they won't even give the game a chance. The game isn't bad. It's hated because people are upset about pieces of the story that didn't meet their expectations. I'm only saying this because I feel the real problems with the story are not getting discussed as much. But before I explain the problems I have with it, I want to give a synopsis and explain why I think it works so well. I think it would be beneficial to look at story structure as well to dissect why this story works. This game is one of revenge and perspective. The game initiates these themes early by having Abby kill Joel while Ellie watches. After Abby kills Joel, Ellie leaves Jackson with Dina to hunt down Abby. During this early portion in Seattle, Ellie manifests this anger in a closed-minded outlook. She repeatedly defends her actions to Dina, and upon hearing that Dina can potentially ruin her quest to kill Abby, she lashes out. This is an example of Ellie's weakness hurting others, which adds more personal stakes to the story. We see this again when she also pushes Jesse away. By claiming to save Tommy, they have to kill Abby. Jesse sees through this, knowing it is just Ellie's desire for revenge talking, which leads to Jesse abandoning Ellie. Early on in the game, we can already see the personal hardships Ellie experiences because of her own obsessions with revenge. However, this is only one of two ways Ellie descends morally. The game also forces the player, as Ellie, to brutally murder Abby's friends until Ellie snaps back to reality when she kills Mel, who is pregnant. Over this section of Ellie's story, it is clear to see that she is becoming emotionally damaged and morally corrupt from her desire for revenge. The scene where she kills Nora, she is shrouded in red light and blood, giving the room a hellish appearance, portraying Ellie as a villain. By the time she kills Mel and Owen, her emotional and mental state becomes so deteriorated that she can't go on. When she gets back to the theater and Tommy steps out, she is still recovering in the traumatic events that she was just put through. Again, this is all to show how Ellie is becoming drained from her quest for revenge. The brutal actions she has to take to complete her journey pushes the player to question the morality of her actions. The gameplay ties in this too. There is a reason the kill animations are so brutal, and the AI drops enemy names. It makes the weight of these kills exponentially heavier on the player. If you didn't have any reaction to the first couple of stealth kills you had to perform, then something in your brain is too hardened because these are meant to make the player feel squeamish. This is what the game really tries to achieve with its story, making the player feel something. Many argue this failed, and that pushing players to feel a certain way is manipulative. However, in my opinion, taking choice away from the player can be a good thing. In fact, the first game utilizes this interaction aspect of video games quite often to make Joel do some heinous things. It's not just Joel killing the doctor at the end of the first game. The player has to press the button to keep the story going. This tie between player and character seen in both games is one of the reasons this game succeeds. For example, early in the game when Ellie and Dino were in the school, Dino gets stuck in a chokehold while you, as Ellie, had to cut your way out of hand ties. I was mashing that button like it was my job, and when I was finally free, I felt rage. I held the sprint button and pressed square the second I could. At first, I was satisfied with my quick reaction, but after witnessing the absolutely brutal animation of Ellie killing this man, I couldn't help but feel squeamish. Is this what I wanted to do? This was my instinctual reaction? Granted, Dino was in trouble and I would have rather killed that guy than have Dina die, but it pushes the player to question if they should go on this revenge quest at all. There would be a lot less bloodshed and violence, but this is why The Last of Us 2 works. You act as both sides of Ellie. You are both the suspect and the witness of vicious murders you commit. There is no way to go for a completely passive run of the game, and that's okay. This is how the theme of revenge is expanded upon. When viewing Ellie's actions, you start to question them. The tie between Ellie and the player continues when Abby appears at the theater. After Jesse's sudden death and seeing Abby being the one who shot him, I wanted to fight and kill Abby right there. I'm not saying taking a break from Ellie's story at this point worked perfectly, but taking the player away from Ellie and introducing them to Abby at this specific point makes sense on paper. It is the ideal moment for the player to rethink everything they have done so far in the game. In other words, it's the midpoint of the game. Structurally, this move makes sense, but as we will discuss later, it doesn't work perfectly in practice. In short, the first portion of the story, Elle in Seattle and trying to find Abby, demonstrates the toll revenge can take on a person and pushes the player to question Ellie's mindset in the first place. If Ellie's story up to this point is about her descent into a vicious murderer blind to her actions, Abby's is the opposite. Abby's section shows her beginning as a closed-minded soldier of the WLF/the Wolves. She is high up in the ranks, and similar to Ellie, defends the Wolves' immoral actions against the Scars. She is blinded by the organization's philosophies, meaning she not only takes part in, but actively tries killing Scars when given the chance. Abby's sequence starts with a flashback of her finding her dad in the zoo and helping a zebra stuck in barbed wire. Many people have stated this already, but this is a very on-the-nose way to get the player to sympathize with Abby. Honestly, I didn't mind it too much. Maybe I wasn't connected to Joel as much as other players or something, but I have seen many videos saying that they would kill Abby on purpose just to feel better. Besides being incredibly morbid, I feel like that's a little close-minded. Abby's flashbacks continue with the game making her dad seem like a great person, but like Joel, having to make an immoral choice. The audience learns he was the one advocating to kill Ellie to get the vaccine. Of course, we all know what happens next, and Abby walks into the room only to witness the horror that just took place. She is completely broken by her dad's murder, and this is where the theme of perspective really comes into play. The game has an incredibly hard task of trying to get the player to care about Abby. So hard, in fact, that it is borderline impossible and didn't work for a lot of people. But through Naughty Dog's efforts, we can see what the game is trying to say. Having Abby be directly influenced by Joel's action creates an excellent motivation for Abby. Essentially, Abby starts the game from the moment she kills Joel just as driven by revenge as Ellie. This parallel eventually leads to a conclusive arc for both Ellie and Abby. Anyways, Abby eventually leaves the Wolf headquarters to find her ex, Owen, at an abandoned aquarium after rumors of him defecting to the Scars emerge. On her way there, She is captured by the scars, and the viewer is subjected to one of the most brutal cutscenes I have seen, where Yara's arm is shattered like a glow stick. The three escape, and this is where the brilliance in Abby's arc begins to show. During their escape, there is a moment where she has to fend off zombies alone, and she's relying on Yara and Lev to open the door for her. It takes longer than she anticipated, and she begins to curse herself for trusting scars. For a moment, we see she is delving into her angry philosophies, that the scars are inherently evil. However, the two Scar rebels end up saving Abby. She leaves the two and contemplates about how it is possible for there to be scars that aren't bad. The next day, her progression continues as she searches for Yara and Lev and brings them back to the aquarium. After hearing that Yara needs her arm amputated, Abby volunteers to help, so Lev and Abby take the Scar's hidden route to the hospital. This is where, on a thematic and character level, the game isn't that bad, but on a gameplay level, continues to disappoint. On the way to the hospital, Abby has to overcome her weakness of vertigo by walking across incredibly high bridges in the air. This, again, acts as a way to humanize Abby. She's facing her greatest fear in order to help, at this point, essentially strangers. This also works on a much deeper character level, as overcoming a weakness to initiate change is in essentially every good story, and it works here just as well. Abby and Lev also have possibly the best optional discussions in the entire game. There are multiple times where I would actually laugh out loud at their conversations. Although an obvious parallel with Joel and Ellie, the relationship between Lev and Abby is at its best during this segment, which in turn is supposed to make the player warm up to Abby. Anyways, the two crash into a hotel, have a fun little time with zombies, and eventually get to the hospital. Here, we see all the body bags as a result of our rampage as Ellie, and talking with Nora knowing we brutally kill her as Ellie only moments later. At this point, Abby is also beginning to be hunted by the wolves, a representation of her changing character. She's beginning to completely turn away from her revenge-driven and angry roots as a soldier. After another crazy time with some zombies, Abby and Lev make it back to the aquarium only for Lev to run away and help his mom. Abby doesn't think twice about going after Lev and leaves with Yara to the Scar Island. The two make it to the Scar Island and we see that Lev has killed his mom. The three start running as the wolves begin attacking the island and Yara gets shot by Isaac, who is then shot by Yara as Lev and Abby escape. At this point, Abby is completely defected from the wolves. This entire segment shows just how truly evil both sides of this war are. There are also never any true reasons the war is happening, only petty arguments turn into massive fights over time. Playing as Abby galloping through the hellish landscape of the Scar Island, killing both wolves and scars is a natural progression of her character and a fantastic showing of perspective. She's encountered the ultimate shift in perspective. Not only does she realize that not all perceived enemies are evil, but anyone, even her own organization, can be evil based off of her position. This marks a drastic change in character, which leads into the moment where Ellie and Abby finally cross paths at the theater. The game picks up outside of the theater. Abby finds a way in, and we now see Ellie from a different point of view. Seeing Ellie from this perspective is incredibly meta. I'm probably reading into this, but I want to briefly discuss how this could be a commentary on mainstream media. The landscape of pop culture is dominated by figures portrayed as gods. Specific characters or people exist in a world outside of time or pain. Many of the Marvel characters or sports athletes are portrayed to be ageless, limitless beings with no signs of weaknesses. Even Naughty Dog's own Nathan Drake is viewed this way. He takes on literal armies with nothing more than a pistol, eating bullets like gummy bears while pulling off extremely difficult physical feats. In other words, there are a lot of characters seen as invincible. So playing this segment of the game, I couldn't help but think about this. We, the player, are not only playing a boss battle against one of these invincible types of characters, but end the fight a mere few punches away from killing her. Again, this may be reading too deeply, but I couldn't help but think of the cultural context this holds. It's as if Naughty Dog is saying that no one is invincible. Not everyone who is portrayed as a hero is truly perfect. In that way, this boss battle is another fantastic development on the theme of perspective. Ellie is conniving, murderous, and brutal in her tactics. I died multiple times from Ellie's intricately placed bombs and lightning-fast reflexes. Seeing her from this point of view is genuinely scary, and I enjoy this new perspective. Honestly, this is one of the best portions of the game both thematically and gameplay-wise in my opinion. Eventually, Abby gets the better of Ellie and is seconds away from killing Dina. Ellie begs, telling Abby Dina is pregnant. For a moment, Abby falls into the cycle of revenge and regresses as a character by almost killing Dina, until Lev intervenes. Abby thinks about what she is doing and spares both Ellie and Dina, telling Ellie to never let Abby see her again. Abby falling back into revenge for a moment is a quality example of story structure, with the life bringing her out of the revenge cycle being the introduction to Abby's third act at the end of the theater section. By giving up the chance to take revenge on Ellie, she leaves the theater a more fully realized person. Ellie, however, ends the sequence at the end of Act 2 type of beat. She still has not put the pieces together on how to be a more fully realized person, but is beginning to see the errors in her revenge-driven ways. I'm calling this portion of the game the epilogue, because that's honestly what it feels like. The game fast-forwards a couple years in the future, and we are back playing as Ellie. She now lives on a farm with Dina and their child Joshi Jr. Despite her happy life, Ellie suffers from extreme guilt and PTSD, so much so that she has incredibly vivid flashbacks of Joel calling her name. A damaged Tommy comes to their house with information on Abby, expecting Ellie to travel to Santa Barbara and finish the job. Ellie initially declines, but after waking up from a PTSD nightmare, she decides to give up on her family and fall back into the cycle of revenge. At first I thought this was ridiculous. I thought that it would be wise for Ellie's character arc for her to go against the idea of revenge and break the never-ending cycle of violence. In fact, I was upset with how I thought the segment was going to end before I actually played it, which is a really damaging way to review a game. Cut to Abby looking for the new group of Fireflies until she is suddenly kidnapped by a gang called the Rattlers. Ellie eventually makes it to the Rattlers and goes on a murderous rampage, indicating her further moral descent. She frees the prisoners, but doesn't do so out of the goodness of her heart, rather to find Abby. They point her to the Pillars, a beach filled with wooden stakes where escapees are hung. Ellie finds a weakened Abby, skinny, bruised, and completely defeated. Ellie cuts her down, and in the confusion, Abby shows Ellie where the boats are. Initially, it seems as though Ellie is going to let Abby leave. However, after seeing her own blood on her hand, Ellie turns around and tells Abby that she won't let her leave. This is the climax of the story. The decisions these characters make will define who they are and how their arcs will be completed. At this point, Abby's arc is complete. She's a more fully realized person that has changed from a blind follower and revenge seeker to an open-minded soldier that doesn't live based off of revenge. Abby has found new reasons to live. Lev, the Fireflies, she essentially has a new life. Abby embraces this new life, satisfied with not taking revenge on Ellie, whereas Ellie provides a perfect contrast. Ellie's arc is not yet complete. She left what should be the reason her life is meaningful in order to satisfy her drive for revenge. Having Ellie come face to face with essentially who Ellie should be makes her character flaws stick out like a sore thumb. Abby denying her chance for revenge in order to make sure Lev is safe is a representation of her completed arc. Ellie responds by threatening to kill Lev, a representation of how Ellie's arc is not yet complete. The two battle in a brutal manner, and when it seems that Ellie has the upper hand, she remembers Joel. At first it seemed like a cheap trick, but it turns out the last conversation they had was about how Ellie was trying to learn to forgive Joel for what he did. Although it would be difficult, Ellie said that she wanted to try and forgive. By remembering this image of Joel, she lets Abby leave, finally breaking the cycle of revenge. Again, many complained about this moment, saying that it was a waste to come all of this way and not kill Abby. However, people that say that are completely missing the point. Not killing Abby is the exact decision Ellie needed to make in order to complete her arc. Ellie makes it back to the farm to see that Dina and JJ have left. She plays her guitar, noticeably worse due to her lack of fingers from her brawl with Abby. She leaves as the credits roll. She has lost everything: her wife, her child, her final connection to Joel, and essentially anything else that gave her life meaning. Ironically, Ellie thought that dying and becoming a cure would give her life meaning, and during the game, she thought that taking revenge would give her life meaning. However, by the time the credits roll, she finally learns that what makes her life worth living is simply what can make her happy. In these final moments, we see that the game is about forgiveness as equally as it is about revenge. The entire story, Ellie wanted revenge, but needed to forgive to complete her arc. This is why the Ellie and Abby parallel works. Abby is simply a more insightful version of Ellie throughout the game. Abby begins the story as a revenge-driven and violent soldier that refuses to believe anything except what she is told. However, after her life is saved by her sworn enemy, she learns that revenge is not satisfying, not everyone who is viewed as the enemy is actually evil, and forgiveness is the key to a meaningful life. Having the player experience this firsthand, in contrast to Ellie's blindness to the same lessons, gives us the feeling that Ellie is incredibly flawed. By the end of the game, I didn't even want to kill Abby. I knew that she was grown, and that by killing Abby, Ellie would be committing a flawed action. Even though I spent pretty much this entire video praising the game, There are serious flaws that definitely hinder the experience. There's something about this game that I find incredibly problematic, and that is the fact that people are not looking at the real problems with the game. No, Joel dying is not an offense so great that you have to quit playing. Ellie not killing Abby isn't a bad ending. In fact, it's a great ending for reasons I discussed earlier. A lot of people are complaining the problems with this game are subjective events that take place. I can see why Joel dying would be a problem for some people, but it works narratively. I can see why people would be upset with Abby after waiting for years for a sequel, but again, it works on a story level. One's opinion about the story does not make this a bad game, and those opinions aren't problems and hold very little merit when critiquing the game. However, there are problems with the game that fueled these fan reactions, most notably the pacing. This game's pacing is honestly pretty terrible. Even myself, a self-proclaimed Last of Us 2 defendant, was feeling incredibly bored at some parts. I'll admit, even though I like Abby, by Seattle Day 2 I was wishing I was playing as Ellie again. I didn't hate Abby, but leaving the game on such a cliffhanger only to push the player's patience for 10 hours made the game so much less enjoyable. The game just feels out of order. It was hard connecting the side characters that I killed 10 hours previously as someone else. I can see the effect Naughty Dog was trying to give by making it this way. By placing in sections of Ellie and Abby, it makes you look at the characters with a sense of dread. By knowing they're going to die, there's a feeling that something is coming that you cannot stop, which ironically is you as Ellie. It's a cool idea, but it would definitely be more impactful if you connect with the side characters as Abby, and are then forced to kill them as Ellie, rather than killing a ton of no-names and then having to connect with them. That's what this entire game feels like. Out-of-order sequences that work on paper, but in execution fails to garner as much emotion as it should have. Many say that if this game was played out chronologically, it would have been beloved, and I think that is completely true. Imagine bonding with characters you simultaneously have to kill. Especially because Abby and Ellie barely miss each other in every scenario, having these sequences back to back would have been infinitely more profound and impactful. This unorganized presentation of the story is what makes everyone believe the game is bad, when in reality it's a fantastic story, simply out of order. I'll admit, the pacing is hard to ignore sometimes, obviously with the Abby segments, but also with the flashbacks. I found these flashbacks to be emotional or heartfelt, definitely worthwhile scenes, but having tutorials over halfway through the game just felt weird. Overall, the pacing isn't great by any stretch of the imagination. It's quite piss poor on some occasions, but it's not so bad that the game is unplayable. It still works the way it's presented now, just not as much as it could have if presented differently. There are some other problems I'll quickly mention. For example, the writing is definitely not as great as the first game. I didn't find it as problematic as other players did, but it did definitely take a dip in quality. Also, some of the side characters aren't as fleshed out as I liked. Jesse was definitely a low point in the game for me. He always just seemed to show up and just claim he cared about the characters without really making it seem like he really did. Also, characters make some pretty uncharacteristic choices. No, I'm not talking about Joel telling the wolves his name. I did not find this problematic. Sure, maybe in his prime Joel wouldn't have trusted anyone, and I can see why this upset people, but I found it completely believable that Joel would tell these people who he is, as Jackson is said to be actively searching for new citizens. I'm more talking about Tommy calling Ellie pathetic for not giving up everything she cares about to go to California and kill Abby. I found this completely out of character considering how kind-hearted and forgiving he was at the beginning of the game. He had little development throughout the game, so such a drastic change honestly left me confused. These are all valid problems and actual reasons the game isn't a perfect 10 out of 10. The game is both not as good as the critics say, and nowhere near as bad as the fans say. I'd say it's a great game, but far from perfect, but even farther from being unplayable. Simply put, people are angry over the wrong reasons. It sucks that Joel died in a pretty measly way. There are a lot of surface level problems that come from a place outside of the game, but if you can ignore these subjective problems, then I promise you can see that this game, although flawed, is far from unplayable.